Hello, this is Amanda Dahlgren, and this is a sample Project 3 full critical analysis presentation. This is the introduction. The photograph that I'll be talking about is by Louis Wicks Hine. He was American. He was born in 1874 and died in 1940. And just a little bit of biographical information about him. His first job was working in an upholstery factory, and he worked there between the ages of 16 and 19. He worked there for 13 hours a day, 6 days a week, for $4 a week. And according to Laurie Oden at the International Photography Hall of Fame and Museum, Hine experienced firsthand the exploitation of young workers, and he was determined to escape this type of life. So that will become important when we see the photograph that I'll be talking about. Hine was one of the first social documentary photographers. He influenced a generation of future documentary photographers. The particular photograph that I'll be talking about is this one here, which Hine made in 1908 in the Turkey Knob mine in McDonald, West Virginia. It was made with a Graflex camera. It was a silver gelatin print, and Hine made it while he was working for the National Child Labor Committee. The NCLC was fighting at this time to promote child labor laws. Many people were against them because child labor was very profitable, and many business owners did not want to accept or follow the laws. While Hine worked for the NCLC, he traveled extensively throughout the U.S. from 1908 to 1918. In those 10 years, he created more than 5,000 negatives of children working in terrible conditions throughout the U.S., in mills, factories, mines, fields, and canneries. He also took detailed notes about each child he photographed, such as the child's age, job description, date, place, etc. He did this because he didn't want there to be any doubt as to the accuracy of the photos and the information. Hine used the photographs in publications such as magazines, pamphlets, books, traveling exhibitions, and slide lectures. His main goal was to educate the public so that they would support laws against child labor. Now I'll go into a description of this particular photograph. I'll start with vantage point. Hine used a direct, straight-on angle and a fairly close vantage point. I see the upper half of the young boy's body, along with a little bit of the ceiling above him and the mine behind him. Hine is close enough that I can see the facial expression on the boy and also a little bit of his surroundings. In terms of light, the main source of light in this photograph comes from the subject's left side, so somewhere over here in this way. So from the subject's left side and a little bit in front of him. The light source is fairly harsh, judging by the sharp shadows, for instance, the shadow right here from his nose. The light strongly illuminates the boy's face so that I can see his eyes and the dirt on his face very clearly. The light also reveals the texture in the low and dirty ceiling right above the boy and then falls off to mostly darkness in the background, making it very difficult to see what is far behind him. Based on my research, the source of the light is Hine's flash, which he positioned to get these effects. Without the flash, the only source of illumination might have been the lamp on the boy's head, which was probably fueled by kerosene. Frame. In terms of framing, it appears to me that the photograph is actively framed, since Hine seems to have placed the subject directly in the middle of the frame. There is a somewhat distracting white shape on the left side of this photograph that may mean that his framing was slightly off, but since the shape is bright white and yet it's not giving off any light to its surroundings, there's no light striking the boy from this side, it's more likely a light leak or a damage to the print. Because of the framing, the photograph is symmetrically balanced, which brings all my attention to the boy in the center. There's also a horizontal line behind the boy that directs my attention to his face and contributes to my belief that Hine carefully and actively framed this photograph. Focus. This photograph has a fairly shallow depth of field with the boy in sharp focus, along with the part of the ceiling that is in the same plane as the boy. As I looked farther back behind the boy, the image becomes less and less in focus. The sharp focus on the boy, along with the symmetrical balance, fairly tight and active framing, and fairly intimate vantage point, all contribute to the visual focal point being most definitely on the boy. In fact, the boy's face is the dominant thing in the photograph because of its placement about a third from the top and in the horizontal middle, and because it's one of the lightest parts of the photograph. Moving on to interpretation. Hine was one of the early social documentary photographers, and his approach was fairly factual. For example, Hine was careful to document a great deal of information about this boy and where he found them in the title of the photograph, including a reference to a witness named E.N. Klopper. He wanted to make sure that his investigative reports for the NCLC were specific and credible. Even while being fairly factual and accurate, I believe his visual choices and vantage point, light, frame, and focus were deliberately chosen to garner sympathy for his subject and to ultimately change public opinion about child labor. The boy's intense gaze into the camera translates into a direct connection with me, the viewer. Hine's visual choices in lighting and focus emphasize how low the ceiling was in this place, 1 mile inside the mine. The focus, vantage point, framing, and lighting all contribute to a sense of intimacy with this boy, while also allowing me to get a sense of this environment. It is interesting to note that Hine has not included the boy's name in the title. It could be that the boy did not want to give his name, or it could be that it was a deliberate choice on Hine's part to avoid having the viewer concentrate on the specificity of this particular boy and instead think about the universality of the broader issue of child labor. Evaluation. I believe this photograph is extremely effective in balancing Hine's need for factual documentation and his effort to garner sympathy for this particular boy and for others like him. Had his vantage point been further away, or had the boy not been looking into the camera, I might not feel the same sense of connection with him. And had his vantage point been closer, I might not understand the claustrophobic feeling in this environment. Hine's use of light and focus are also very effective in bringing my attention to the boy's face and eyes, and to the soot and dirt on his face and clothes. I also believe that any unusual compositional devices might have taken this photograph out of documentation and into the realm of art, which might have destroyed the strong sense of truth in this photograph. I definitely agree with historian Naomi Rosenblum, who said, Hine's photographs transcend basic documentation in that he sought out poses, facial expressions, and gestures that not only would be perceived as truthful, but would also stir the viewer's sympathy and spur them to action. Louis Hine said, I am sure I am right in my choice. My child labor photos have already set the authorities to work to see if such things can be possible. Many years later, the power of Hine's photographs would be acknowledged by Owen Lovejoy of the National Child Labor Committee that had contracted Hine to make his photographs. Lovejoy said, the work that you did under my direction was more responsible than any or all other efforts to bring the facts or conditions of child labor employment to public attention. With photographs like this one, Louis Hine was able to fulfill his mission. The work that Hine did for the NCLC, this photograph included, played a major role in the eventual passage of child labor laws nearly 30 years later, when during the Great Depression, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, which, among other things, placed limits on many forms of child labor.